If your ink's too slow and your nib won't flow, here's one of the places that you can go. Larry is here to see you through with Mr. Announcer and Cubby too. It's Larry's Fountain Pen Reviews.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my first ink. Buddy, come on, crap, and we'll have to edit all this and start it again. Hello, my good friends, Larry here, and welcome to the show. Today, I'm starting the first of people's favorite 3 inks, and of course, they can always put a honorable mention of whatever they want to do, like Mr. Johnston did. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Johnston. So I want to introduce the main man that starts the whole show off, the one, the only, the imperial Mr. Justin. Take it away.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Well, thanks for having me on, Larry, again. It was cool to do the top 3 pens. So we collabed and came up with this idea, like, nobody's doing inks. So let's talk about inks. Inks are important. They're kind of the blood of our pens. So, all right, are you ready?
We're ready. Let's do it, bro.
All right, so I got some wild cards. You know, like a lot of us fountain pen freaks, we've got all sorts of cool inks in our stash. And there's a lot of great ones out there. You know, there's some standbys that everybody loves. Diamine Oxblood is probably one of the top ones that people just enjoy. It's a good all-arounder. But, you know, I wanted to bring in some wild card stuff that I really enjoy that are kind of like my top inks. So let me start with those. And some of these are kind of hard to obtain. So maybe that'll be kind of some cool eye candy. The first of which is that coming through okay?
Yeah, looks good.
So the first of which is Diamine Kong Guys. Now, this is a Hong Kong exclusive. There's a company out of Hong Kong that sells these on Etsy if you'd like to get a hold. They've got 3 Hong Kong exclusives, Lion Rock, Kong Girls, and then I picked up Kong Guys. And the company on Instagram is Stationary Studio Shan, I think it is. So take a look at them and try to find them if you're interested in catching this ink. But I love this ink because it's very unique in the sense that it's got like a real kind of dark midnight blue. But if you get it wet enough on the right paper, you're going to get what I like to call a Coca-Cola looking sheen. So you can kind of see the sheen there on the image. And it's just got kind of that sort of golden brown to it. That's really, really unique. My second ink is by a company out of the Philippines called Troublemaker. And again, these inks can be challenging to get a hold of because they're produced in small batches out of the Philippines. And this one is called Milky Ocean. And I love this ink because it is a nice, like, light azure blue. And you can see it's got beautiful pink and gray highlights. Now, this is pretty saturated, but if you get kind of a good, like a lighter swatch, you'll get some gray tones in there as well. So it's a good kind of light shading ink. And I, for one, really, really enjoy shading inks and sheening inks, of course. My next ink is soon to become extinct. And I wanted to showcase this one because it's one of my all-time favorites from the Hiroshi Shizuku line. And that is Tsukushi, which is, I believe, is Japanese for horse's tail. But I picked this ink up in Dubai on a whim. And I really enjoy it. It's a nice chocolate brown. And this ink is beautiful because if you wash it like with an artist rendering, you'll get some beautiful pink tones from it as well. So it's a good ink. If you enjoy browns like I do, like brown is one of my most favorite ink tones, you got to get a bottle of this as quick as you can because Pilot, unfortunately, is going to discontinue this one. So heads up on that. So those are my top 3 inks. Just as kind of a review, Diamine Kong Guys, beautiful dark blue with a Coca-Cola sheen. Milky Ocean, which is an azure blue with pink and gray highlights. And then Tsukushi, which is a beautiful chocolate brown that washes pink. And then I have my runner-up, and this is just because this is such a unique ink. by Mont Blanc, and this is Swan Illusion. Now, my image doesn't render as nice as I would have liked, but this is a beautiful sort of taupe brown that washes really light. And I enjoy this one for writing because it gives your script an almost sort of ethereal, ghost-like effect. So I really enjoy this ink as well. It's kind of a runner-up to my top 3. So, Larry, there you go. Those are my top 3 inks.
So before we hang up, let me ask you a question real quick. How long did it take you to decide these were your top 3?
I've got over 60 or 70 different inks right now. So it's a tough decision because, like, although these are like my top 3, I love all my inks. I try to pick the inks that I really, really enjoy. Because there's people that are like, I'm just going to buy a spectrum of color and just kind of see what susses out. For me, I try to be really choosy when I pick. So all of my inks I really enjoy. And I think I explained this before. I have ink attention deficit disorder, where it's like I have to have pens with small capacities in order to allow me to change inks more often, just so I can enjoy more colors. So I write, fountain pen letters, fountain pen letter friend, like fountain pen friends letters. Can't talk straight. And most of the letters that I do, I try not to write in the same color more than about a page. And then I try and change it up. Now I have some friends that like to get more color in those letters. And so they do like half a page and change the color up. And I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I might try that. But yeah, it's a tough, long story short, it was a tough decision. I tried to pick ones that were sort of wild card inks that not everybody has, because again, there's some good standbys. Roshizuku makes a lot of good ones. A very popular color for Roshizuku is Konpeki. And it's a beautiful color. I love it. I have a bottle of that and I totally recommend it. But a lot of people would probably recommend that one as well. So I want to pick some stuff that was kind of maybe off people's radar a little bit. So I try to pick some companies that are not like the standards. Diamine and Roshizuku are pretty common, but like Troublemaker is pretty uncommon. Mont Blanc is kind of uncommon. Some people have them, some people don't. So yeah, I just try to pick some stuff that would like be interesting to your users, but also allow people to see some inks that have some interesting properties as well. And I think those are some of my most unique inks, because you got one that sheens and the rest of them shade. And I really enjoy inks with unique properties as well as interesting tones.
Have you ever ran into an ink that you did not like?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So my wife and I took a holiday to Rome for our 16th anniversary. And while we were there, of course, we had to visit some of the fountain pen shops. And Visconti is a big brand, and they're actually out of Florence. And we went to their shop in Florence. And I can't remember if it was the shop in Florence or the shop in Rome we visited, but we picked up a bottle of Visconti ink. And I still have the bottle. It's that sort of unique vase-looking bottle that is just, it's a beautiful bottle. The ink, however, I believe cracked one of my pens. Oh, he's got some.
Yeah. It cracked.
There it is. So, yeah, it's debatable, because there's people that are like, well, it's the pen that you're using it in. Yeah, that's the stuff. So I had the sepia one, because remember, I'm a brown guy. I love brown ink. So I had the sepia ink. Now that ink, no matter what paper I used it on, would feather like crazy. It's a super wet, high-flowing ink. So even with my like extra fine nib pens, it was just a gusher. It would turn your like Japanese extra fine nib into like a German broad. That's how wet that ink was. And I tried everything I could, like with chemistry, to get that ink to dry out. And what kind of bought the farm for that ink was the fact that when I put it in my TWSBI Eco, it actually cracked the plastic. Now people are like, well, it's the plastic of the Ecos, and TWSBI's plastics weren't all that great. Like, no, I didn't have any problems with that pen ever with any other ink. But when I put whatever the pH of that ink is, when I put it in that specific plastic, it caused it to crack. I never had a problem with that pen before then. And yeah, I put a lot of inks through it. I used it a lot. I bought the TWSBI Eco because I'm an English teacher and I was using it to mark papers. And that huge ink capacity is amazing, because you could put like, maybe 4 or 5 milliliters of ink in those things. They're huge. But I would sit there and load it up with like Diamine Oxblood or Diamine Red Dragon and just like mark papers like crazy. But I put the Visconti in, cracked the pen. So I'm like, TWSBI took care of me. They did a really good job. I like that company. They took care of me, replaced the body of it. But I really believe it was the pH of that ink. And so that was what got it the Flush Award. Another ink that I really enjoyed but didn't enjoy the properties were some of the Organic Studios inks. And it's controversial. It's controversial. But nitrogen and Walden, they're beautiful colors.
Yep.
But I like to call them the blue bombs because the pigment that guy uses in his inks, when the ink dries, it crystallizes and it'll leave blue powder everywhere. And if that blue powder gets on anything, it's going to stain it like crazy. So if you own one of those inks, you have to, I would say, dilute them because they're so saturated as an ink that they want to clog pens because it'll dry up really quickly and it'll clog a pen. So to get it to work and work well, you want to dilute them. Maybe almost, I did a 1-to-1 dilution. That's how strongly concentrated those inks are. So I got frustrated with how I would find little color crystals everywhere. Whenever I'd open the lid, like it would stain my desk, it stained my letters, it stained my hands. It even stained my feet because some of the crystals fell on the floor and I stepped on it and then I had a blue foot for like a week. It was crazy. So those inks I were not a fan of just because they were high maintenance. So yeah, but then again, I own some crazy inks. I own a bottle of the infamous Bay State Blue from Noodlers. And that ink is a dangerous blue bomb, and it's a beautiful blue. It's amazing blue, and I recommend that if you're feeling adventurous, get a bottle. And I've never had a problem with it, but at the same time, I have a designated pen for that ink, and it's only used in that pen, and that pen only holds Noodler's Bay State Blue. Yep. So those are some troublesome inks that I've come across. Yeah.
Okay, here's a question I'm going to throw at you. And just get your feedback. We have a lot of new people that are joining fountain pen groups and that are finding out about fountain pen groups, and they're also finding out about all these inks. And can you explain to them in your own words that they could understand, what does feathering ink do when you say feathering?
Sure. So the thing, if you're transitioning from like a more traditional gel pen or a ballpoint, those inks are real oil heavy. And I think one of the reasons they write so well is because there's a lot of oil in the ink. And it provides a good lubricant. It just guarantees that your pen's going to write every time you put the ball down to the paper. It'll make sure it'll write. But it also keeps the ink from bleeding too much into the fibers of the paper. And that's what feathering is. It's when the ink starts bleeding too much into the fiber of the paper. So you're not going to notice this writing with your standard everyday Bic pen. Your lines are going to be nice and crisp, and your word's going to look really clean. Sometimes what'll happen is, with fountain pen inks, they tend to be thinner because the chemical makeup of them is a little bit different. So a lot of them, I'm not sure if they have oil in them or not, but a lot of them are water-based. So that creates a thinner ink. And sometimes what will happen is with certain papers, that ink starts to leach out and spread into the paper. And so you'll write something that you're used to seeing look nice and clean, but that ink will start leaking into the fibers of the paper, and then your word's going to look kind of blurry. And it's very visually unappealing, unless you're trying for some crazy artistic aesthetic. But a lot of people don't do that. So I would like to see an artist that uniquely uses feathering. There's a lot of guys that I know that do pretty cool stuff. There's one guy on Instagram, and he actually does an inverse. So he'll saturate the paper with ink, and then he'll draw with bleach, and that bleaches out the image, which is beautiful. It's amazing use of color and stuff. But I think using feathering, because feathering is so out of control, it's challenging. So you'd have to create a lot of abstract pieces with it or something. So yeah, that's kind of feathering in a nutshell. It's when your ink kind of misbehaves and starts feathering, and it happens on lower quality papers. And it's kind of the bane of fountain pen enthusiasts that aren't looking for that. Most people aren't looking for feathering to happen with their writing. So we'll resort to using special papers like Tomo River. The swatches that I did were from a company called Good Impressions, and it's by a gal out of Spain. You can find them on Etsy, Good Impressions. I totally recommend them. She has a horde of Tomo River, and I know that a lot of people are like, Tomo River is going extinct, and it is, but she still has a lot, and she's cranking out amazing notebooks. She's got I think the standard 52 GSM, which is the thinner, which most people are used to, but she also has the 68, and those swatches were done on the white 68. So if you're looking for the 68, you can't find it.
That's a nice paper.
Yeah, she has it. So I've been doing Inktober this year. I do Inktober every year for sketches, and I've been using exclusively her notebooks for that. And it's held up to washes. It's held up to a lot of my heavy ink applications. It does pretty good. So I was very happy with her product in that paper. But that's a good ink, a good paper to avoid feathering. Another good ink to avoid, another good paper to avoid feathering is Rhodia or Clairefontaine. Those are both French papers, and I believe they're made by the same company. They just package them differently in their notebooks. Rhodia is pretty readily available. I've also picked up a couple of those field notebooks recently, and that's an American-made notebook. Those sort of pocket-sized notebooks. They're really nice, and those seem to handle ink fairly well. Originally, I think his papers didn't jive too well with fountain pen inks, but now they do better. And then, so kind of back to the feathering issue, some inks tend to be more prone to feathering than others. If you have what they call a super wet ink, the ink's going to flow out of the pen because it feels like whatever the chemical makeup of the ink, it just feels thinner. And I'm guessing that maybe they put in some sort of like binder that allows the ink to sort of fasten to the paper a little easier. And maybe there's some sort of industrial soap in there or something, some sort of binding agent that allows the ink to sort of latch on the paper. So if it's got maybe too much of that in the formula, then your ink, it might feather. I've noticed that like Bay State Blue does kind of want to feather a bit. And I also kind of wonder if maybe the acid inside the ink, like the pH level of the ink, has an effect on that as well, because more acidic inks that are known to stain pens tend to lean more towards feathering on paper. So yeah, I'm not a chemist. I mean, I studied chemistry a bit, but I'm not like a full-blown chemist. So it'd be interesting to kind of do pH tests on inks just to see, okay, if the ink is more acidic, it's going to be more prone to feathering and staining the pen versus more basic, and if it's more prone to be thicker or have more dry writing experience. So when ink is dry, it tends to not flow as smoothly. It tends to shade more. Like the troublemaker inks tend to be more of a dry ink. And although it writes well, you notice a difference when writing with it, just in the way that it feels. It's not as silky, but it has a beautiful shading experience. So there's trade-offs with every kind of ink.
Well, cool. Well, Justin, thank you for coming on today and starting to show off with your 3 top inks. And number 4 was cool. And what was interesting, your number 4th ink was interesting. I've never seen that Mont Blanc ink before.
Yeah, that was something I actually picked up from the Mont Blanc shop in the Dubai Mall. And I've been looking for it for a while because, again, I like inks with a unique character to it. And Mont Blanc's got a lot of great inks, but a lot of their colors are very like standard, right? Like I have a bottle of their Irish green. It's a beautiful green, but there's a lot of similar greens out there. You know, and they're reds. They've got a James Dean red. It's a beautiful red, but there's a lot of similar reds out there. Swan Illusion was different because of its shading factors and that sort of taupe. You know, if you're not a brown fan, it's probably not going to be your cup of tea, but I think it would appeal to a lot of writers. Now, on my swatch, it looks browner, but when you're in real life, it looks a little grayer. So it's kind of like a taupey gray color, and it does shade magnificently. So if you put in a big, thick, like bold nib and get a lot of ink laid on the paper, the shading is just outstanding. I totally recommend it in like a pilot parallel if you're doing calligraphy or something. It's a beautiful ink.
Okay, well, Justin, again, thank you much, and I'll get back to you so we can do something else brand new coming up. All right?
All right, Larry, it's been a pleasure again.
I appreciate you 1,000 times, my friend. Take care.
Okay,
Bye,
see
Justin.
ya. Bye.